You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. The war on Antifa, or maybe it's Antifa? It's so back. Last week, in an executive order, President Trump once again tried to designate Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. He followed that up with a memo directing the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force to investigate individuals and groups engaged in political violence and intimidation. Trump cited Antifa as a reason to mobilize 200 National Guard troops in Oregon, which are expected to arrive in Portland within the next week. The president claimed that ICE facilities in the city were, quote, under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. So what is behind these anti-Antifa moves by the White House? And what exactly is Antifa? Christopher Mathias is here with more. He's a reporter covering the far right. He has a forthcoming book about anti-fascism. Chris, thank you very much for being here. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks so much for having me.
How do you say it? Because I've never known how to say it.
See, that's such a good question. So I say Antifa, and I think that is like in the American twang and dialect and accent. That's just how it rolls off the tongue more naturally. But like it is a European word that Americans didn't know about until about 10 years ago. And over there, it is pronounced, see, I can barely say it anymore. It's uh, Antifa, Antifa. Yeah. So like in the American twang, and especially like I think circa 2017, when Trump started to say it in his speeches, it just became like very Americanized and turned into Antifa. Um,
Yeah. All right.
so,
But if it's okay if I say Antifa, because it's just easier.
oh no, that's
Um,
I mean that's I just wrote a book about it, and that's how I say it now too. So,
Great. So, yeah, you have a forthcoming book. It's called To Catch a Fascist. In the reporting of this book, you spoke with 60 Americans who have identified as anti-fascists. So what exactly is Antifa? Like, what do they do? Who is supposedly a member? What is this group?
yeah, I mean, Antifa is notoriously hard to define or pin down, even for people who might consider themselves as part of that subculture. But essentially, what Antifa refers to, it is a shortening of the word anti-fascist, but it refers to a decentralized network of kind of maybe more militant radical leftists who are dedicated to confronting the far right. And what distinguishes, I think most Americans would, you know, think of themselves as anti-fascists. But what distinguishes Antifa from maybe a lot of other people is that they believe in occasionally violently confronting the far right in the streets. They do not believe in the power or the ability of law enforcement or the government to fight fascists. They see those institutions as kind of inherently white supremacist or even fascist in and of themselves. And they also believe that, you know, fascists should have no platform to speak or organize. And it's kind of Antifa takes it upon themselves to try to deplatform them or make sure that they're not able to hold rallies, or you know, maybe they need to get kicked off social media platforms for violating terms of service and stuff like that.
So this is a movement and an ideology, but not necessarily an organized group. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is despite what Trump and the MAGA movement says, and Antifa is not an organization. It's incredibly decentralized, and by that I mean leaderless. There's no Antifa headquarters. There's no, you know, monthly fees or membership fees. There's not like an initiation process necessarily. There are some more formalized Antifa groups, which we can get into later, including in Portland, like Rose City Antifa. But for the most part, when we talk about Antifa, we're talking about very small formations of activists that are mostly doing nonviolent work to disrupt far right and fascist organizing in their communities.
So mostly nonviolent, but as you mentioned, they expressly do support the use of violence in some instances.
Yes, definitely. So they will not shy away from saying that they think it's okay to occasionally punch a Nazi. And I think That is, so in 2017, there was a series of very big far right rallies in America, um, including in Berkeley and Seattle and Charlottesville, where anti fascists turned up to confront the far right. And there were a lot of viral videos of Nazis, neo Nazis, fascists, other far right people occasionally getting attacked. So I think in the popular imagination, most Americans associate Antifa with kind of this black clad radical that's like who are going around, punching whoever they want. Um, when in fact, Antifa's relationship to violence is, you know, it's very selective, and they can sometimes get into very tedious debates about when and where it should be used. Um, so yeah, although like they do embrace some militancy, I would argue that the vast majority of the work, and it is the focus of my book, is nonviolent.
I should mention in 2019, there was a man in Tacoma who attacked an ICE facility, threw Molotov cocktails and set his car on fire. That perpetrator had identified himself as Antifa. There was another self described member of Antifa who killed a far right activist in Portland in 2020. We did have, an incident not too long ago in Seattle, protests outside of a DHS facility where there was some people who roughed up, and one guy in particular who punched repeatedly a right-wing journalist who kind of was on the ground, had a helmet on. That individual is facing charges. And I'm also not 100% sure, again, because this is not an organized group, when people claim membership with Antifa, is that like good enough? Does that mean they're part of that movement? It's for me,
It's
it seems very fuzzy.
it's always really fuzzy, and I think you kind of have to take it on a case by case basis. I think a lot of times violence that gets ascribed to Antifa is just kind of more broadly left wing violence, or kind of confrontational dynamics at protests. In the case of Willem Van Spronsen, who attacked the ICE facility in Tacoma, and of Michael Renault, who shot and killed a far right activist in Portland. Yeah, they both identified as Antifa, and they were, I think, to a certain degree, mixed up in those circles. So it's not totally out of order to, I think you can take their self designation at their word there. But for the most part, if when you look back at the last 25 years, the far right can be tied to hundreds and hundreds of murders, whereas kind of self-identified anti-fascists can be tied to one, which was arguably in self-defense.
Let's talk a little bit about the history here of how the American public, at least, came to know the term Antifa. And that does, you ascribe it to the aftermath of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, when it really became a part of the zeitgeist. Can you talk to me about the history of that term, and especially the right using the term Antifa as a type of catch-all for any kind of, demonstrations that they dislike, people who show up who kind of look like they're ready for a street brawl, things like that. What do you kind of, how would you kind of describe how Antifa became such an important boogeyman on the right?
Totally. Yeah, it's really interesting because, like I said earlier, hardly anyone before 2016, maybe, in America knew what Antifa was. By 2017, Merriam-Webster dictionary added the word to its dictionary. Oxford Dictionary shortlisted it for word of the year. And essentially, where Antifa didn't come out of nowhere in America, it is part of a lineage or tradition of direct confrontation against the far right. And I would note, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where you had groups in the 80s and 90s like anti-racist action and other assorted groups that were essentially trying to kick Nazis out of the punk scene and off the streets. And they were young punks, but eventually developed some really sophisticated methods for confronting the far right and gathering intelligence on the far right and exposing the memberships of different far right groups. And they found a lot of success in that. So by 2015, with the rise of Trump and with the rise of a lot of different new white supremacist groups, this kind of old anti-fascist coalition got the band back together, and they, were confronting this new generation of fascist groups. And by this point, American anti-fascist groups hadn't always identified as Antifa, but in the mid aughts, they started to. So by 2017, when all these kind of viral videos of Antifa occasionally punching neo-Nazis and other fascists on the streets, it kind of captivated the American imagination. And specifically after Charlottesville, it's very interesting. There was a pro-Trump troll named Microchip, who, after Charlottesville, created a viral petition to the White House, to Trump, to designate Antifa a domestic terror group. At the time, Microchip, who by the way is like pseudonymous, he has a large following on Twitter, but no one at that point knows his name. He gives an interview to Politico where he's very clear about what he's doing. He knows that the president can't actually designate Antifa a domestic terror group, but that's not the point. The point is to distract and deflect from all the far-right violence Americans had seen that year, especially on the streets of Charlottesville, where a neo-Nazi drove his car into a crowd of protesters and killed Heather Heyer. And then the Antifa boogeyman really kicked into gear again in 2020 during the anti-racist uprisings over the killing of George Floyd. The reason I think that the far right and MAGA and Trump blamed these uprisings on Antifa was to somehow portray the uprisings as inauthentic, as if they were kind of astroturfed or not representative of the communities that were rising up against their local police. So it was in a way, it was kind of a method of sowing division on the left. But it also created a pretext for the far right to start violently confronting these demonstrations in the streets. And you saw this kind of rumor mill about Antifa going to overdrive, especially again in the Pacific Northwest, where Antifa was blamed for wildfires raging across Washington and Oregon and Idaho. And what happened as a result of that, you saw these far-right militia groups creating checkpoints on the streets in rural communities, stopping people on the street to ask them about their political beliefs while carrying long guns.
I just have to interrupt there because I had an experience in Astoria, Oregon with my husband one day. My husband is of Middle Eastern descent and he has brown skin, and a man completely out of the blue, we were standing waiting for a food truck. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago, came up to my husband and asked him if he was the leader of the local Antifa group. And the only thing we could think of at the time was that there weren't a lot of brown people around and that my husband had curly hair. And so maybe this guy like confused him with somebody from an internet posting or social media. But it was very unnerving. Now, the man wasn't like visibly armed or threatening my husband, but he asked specifically, "Are you Antifa? You look like you're Antifa, and you look like this guy who leads the local Antifa outfit." And it was quite weird and creepy and intimidating for us.
That's so unsettling. Yeah, I mean, and it's very interesting you say that, because there was a very similar scenario that played out in Washington State, in the town where they filmed Twin Peaks. And it was a black man and I believe his white wife and their daughter, and they had a trailer and they were driving to go on a camping trip. And around this time, there were all these viral fake rumors about busloads of Antifa that were going to come to your town and burn down small businesses. Um, so they stop at like a convenience store, and all of a sudden, this black man is surrounded by these kind of white menacing men asking him if he's Antifa. He calmly explains that no, he's not. Um, Gets back in his RV with his family, drives to the camping ground, and all of a sudden realizes he's being followed by a caravan of cars of militiamen. And he looks out the window, and at one point, someone on the side of the street's pointing a gun at him. The family eventually gets to the camping ground, um, and the these men follow them into the camping ground, and eventually they start to hear chainsaws and fireworks, and these like far right activists had cut down trees to block the street for the family to get out, and it was an absolutely horrifying experience.
Yeah, I should emphasize again that the person who asked my husband about being Antifa was not threatening, but it was the implication was if he had had the wrong answer, that they would have problems. And I was ashamed of being from the Pacific Northwest when that occurred because I had, been excited to show my husband around. And that was a really difficult day when that happened. So we're a little bit far afield now, but I just want to get back to where we are today with Trump designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. You've alluded to this, but there is no domestic designation. There's no equivalent domestically for like designating ISIS or something as a terrorist organization. So legal experts are pretty skeptical here. What do you think Trump is trying to accomplish with this executive order?
Yeah, so this is like you said, there is no domestic terror statute to designate a group like Antifa a terror group, and for good reason, because it's there's a lot of very big First Amendment concerns there, right? Like even if you wanted to designate a white supremacist group like the Klan a domestic terror group, that leaves open the possibility when a president gets in power that he can just designate whoever he doesn't like a terrorist group. What Trump is doing here is signaling to law enforcement that he wants them to really go after his opponents and those who are against him. And even though, legally it doesn't change that much, it's basically a really big rhetorical escalation.
What are you going to be watching for, Chris, as this operation for the National Guard in Portland goes down? You mentioned that there is a group that identifies as Antifa in Portland, which is maybe more organized than in other communities. I mean, do you expect there to be violent confrontations? Do you expect there to be anything, involving that group, like wanting to make a statement because the National Guard is there? What are you going to be watching for?
Yeah, I certainly don't know how different anti-fascist groups are going to operate. I will say that since Trump has been elected, a lot of anti-fascist activists have maybe taken a step back or gone a little further underground because they were fearing precisely this scenario where there would be some kind of crackdown. But, I think we have seen demonstrations against kind of federal incursion into progressive cities in Chicago and in LA. And you can't necessarily call those confrontations Antifa. I think those are just kind of everyday people that are upset and worked up about this.
But I think
So
that's the problem, right? Is that it's such a fuzzy definition, and that the people who desire to use Antifa as an opponent can label basically anything they see in terms of activism, and when anything ends up getting chaotic or violent, even if it's not actually a quote unquote Antifa member, it's a very effective tool, right? Like how does this go ahead.
No, yeah, it's I agree. It's very effective. And the MAGA movement, the right, has been very successful in kind of exploiting the vagaries around Antifa, and the confusion over what Antifa is to label whoever it wants to be Antifa.
Christopher Mathias is a journalist covering the far right and Antifa. His upcoming book is coming out in February. It's called To Catch a Fascist. Chris, I hope we can have you back on again when the book comes out. I'm eager to learn more about your reporting, and thank you very much for shedding more light on what's going on right now with the executive order and also in Portland.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and I would love to come back. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.